and I getting familiar with Brookfield Renewable Energy. We went to their monthly operations meeting, and we had the FERC inspection at the Conklingville Dam, where the inspector, James Wang, he complimented not only the engineering staff but the superintendent for their work and the passage of that. We were in Krogan as well for the pre-exercise review of the Stillwater Dam Emergency Action Plan, and I also went to the, just to note, the Joint Commission on Public Ethics. I completed the ethics requirements for the state. That's the gist of my activities for the month, and we'll get into the Black River apportionment, I think, as we go along here.
Yeah. Any questions, comments? Yeah, I just want to point out that because of the apportionment, our next two meetings are in the Black River area to allow people to comment. You know, as is our policy. Contracts. Resolution to authorize the seal.
Mr. Chairman, we're still under Mr. Small's report. We have two items.
Oh, okay. You're right. We need a resolution to approve the revised Black River area budget. Mr. Farrar.
Mr. Chairman, the board should have a 3 or 4 page set of documents addressing a revised budget. This revision basically becomes necessary to address the inclusion of an amount chargeable to the state, which will be a new component of this pending reapportionment or apportionment of the Black River area. The second couple of pages is the resolution that will approve this revised budget. The last 2 pages is the revised budget, and I would point out that on the first page of the revised budget, the next to the last page, which has all of the cost elements, there is no change to that portion of the budget. All of the cost elements for each of the next 2 years, the second year of the current cycle, which began July 1, through June 30th, 2018, none of those cost elements change. All the amounts remain the same. On the last page, which are the revenue items, I know this is small writing, down midway you'll see a item less chargeable to the state. That is the new included item that requires a revised budget to be approved. And that is reflected for this current year through next year, June 2018. So those amounts effectively reduce the final fixed annual assessment amount that was previously, if memory serves me, $1,151,618, I believe, down to $921,207 for the last 2 years of the Black River area budget. That final annual assessment will be shared, as we will get into the apportionment, by the counties at 7.18% and the hydros at the remaining 92.82%. Pretty straightforward. If the board has any questions, but we need to revise that budget.
We need a motion to accept the revised budget.
I'll make a motion to accept the revised budget.
I'll second that.
Mr. Netto, Mr. Rosenthal.
Any further questions or discussions? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Board approval of the Black River area apportionment. It says
is it okay
staff,
if I-
so
Sure.
I guess we got everybody.
Don't all fight at once.
Well, I'm going first only because seeker should be done early in the process. This is something that we have thought about, periodically mentioned to the board. The board has, I think, probably given it some thought as well. It's my opinion that the board's consideration and adoption of this apportionment is an action that is subject to the State Environmental Quality Review Act, but that action falls within several of the actions enumerated in Seeker's Type 2 list. So we believe it falls, I believe, that it falls within the actions enumerated at that Type 2 list, paragraphs 20, 21, 27, and 37. The action is a routine in nature, although infrequent. It is necessary for the continuance of the agency's administration and management. It does not fund or create any new program nor reorder any agency priorities. That portion of the apportionment requires the board to estimate costs of the district for seeker purposes is a budgetary process which does not in and of itself commit the agency to commence, engage in, or approve any particular course of action. In that light, the apportionment is merely the adoption of a policy or procedure through which the agency funds its activities. And finally, the apportionment is an action required by statute and through the settlement through court order. If the board were to consider it an unlisted action, I would advise that we're aware of no impacts of that action which would negatively affect the environment. I would caution the board chair to see if anybody else on the board has any other concerns about impacts on the environment, and if none, to accept a motion to adopt the apportionment as a type 2 action under seeker, basically just taking care of the seeker role, the board's role in seeker.
Do we need to take, or do everything at once? Should we do that right now?
We could do that now.
The seeker can be addressed now.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Board have any concerns about
No.
the environmental impact?
No.
So it was Mr. Let's the first stressor second.
Okay, all in favor of making this a type 2 seeker review? Is that the
Aye.
correct motion?
Yep.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you. Box checked. And now on to the meat.
Next.
We'll go to the Chief Engineer.
Yeah, okay.
Kick off.
We supplied the board with, and you'll find it on page 34 of the board package, the final update to the memorandum, which we've been issuing to the board on the Black River area apportionment for the last several months. The last section within the memo, page 4 of the memo, calculation apportionment, is fairly straightforward and to the point discussion of how the proportion of benefit, which we've calculated for the hydros and for the counties, is then used to create the apportionment for the purposes of assessing. And again, to reiterate what Mr. Farrar mentioned, the heart of this includes a distribution of the cost of operation after the state's share is taken into account, a distribution among the hydros of 92.82% of the remaining balance of cost of operation, and with 7.18% distributed to the counties themselves. And all of that is spelled out in an attachment E, I believe it is, which is a summary of the proposed apportionment of the operating expenses for the Black River area. And if you care to turn to attachment E, I will just briefly go over some of those tables which outline the apportionment. The first 3 pages actually of attachment E are the apportionment calculations for the hydroelectric facilities and respective to the individual reservoirs. So the first being Stillwater's, the
Beginning
second...
on page 57, I think, correct?
Thank you. Then Stillwater's, then the Fulton Chain at Six Lake and Old Forge, and lastly the Hawkinsville Dam. And with the proportion of benefit described, as well as the apportionment value calculated taking into consideration the 92.82% distribution of cost. The last table, which was the superseded table, which I handed out this morning, describes the county's proportion of benefit and the respective apportionment for Hamilton, Herkimer, Oneida, Lewis, and Jefferson County.
And as I mentioned, we just, we finished our visits to all 5 of the counties, and we've talked to either the chairman of their board of supervisors or their board of legislators, and we got feedback, and we made them, it's completely transparent to them that they know how the apportionment is set up, and so far we've got no written comments back from any of those counties at this point.
In addition to the superseded table that I just mentioned, we also handed out this morning 2 attachments to this memorandum. Attachment F, which is the description of the hydro properties, as well as a map indicating the location on the rivers of the properties. And attachment G, which I think Mr. Farrar will probably want to address, which is the assessment itself.
All right, so if Mr. Fulton mentioned that as part of attachment E, each of those apportionments for the hydros by reservoir operation. If you look at page, or after the county apportionment sheet, assessment sheet, the very first sheet that has all of the projects listed for Stillwater Reservoir. This is a statement of regular assessment for Stillwater, that first sheet. Those shares of cost of what have been determined are determined on this hydro power sheet that Mr. Fulton provided you. So on 57, you have apportionment for the hydropower facility, Black River area, Stillwater Reservoir. This is the apportionment for Stillwater. It sets the apportionment percentages. Those percentages are then transferred to the assessment sheet, and each of those percentages are the multiplier times the specific fixed annual assessment piece that the hydros are going to be responsible for. So back to the 50,000 feet. We have a new budget now that's been revised that brings the assessment from the former $1,151,000 and change to $921,207. That amount right up front is going to be split 7.18% to the counties. And if you look at that county sheet, you'll see that their total amount is $66,143. That is the 7.18% of the $921,207. The hydros are the balance, which is the help me Rob, 855.
830, 831, 838.
Well, that's one piece. So the remaining balance of, I think, 855 and change
plus another
will be
22.
Stillwater's pieces. The Stillwater apportionment is 831, 838. The next sheet, the Hawkinsville, is 21,962. And the final Six Lake Old Forge is $1,264. Those 3 amounts are the 92.82% of the total needed to be assessed for this year and for next year. This is a little bit of a change from the previous apportionment in the sense that the hydros and the other facilities, operating or not, were all on one sheet. There was one Black River assessment. The change this year is to do it by the river. That's why you're getting 3 this time. So if you were so most of the folks, the bigger operators, can I use Brookfield as an example, would probably be on all 3 sheets, correct?
Yes, anyone who's downstream of all 3 reservoirs, so any of the hydros which are downstream of the confluence of the Beaver and the Black River would be receiving benefit from Hawkinsville, Old Fort Six Lake, as well as Stillwater.
Correct.
And then upstream of those, it would be a combination of one or two facilities, depending on whether or not you're only on the Black River downstream of Hawkinsville or downstream of the Moose River, and thus receiving Hawkinsville and Old Fort Six Lake benefits. So it's a combination.
So this time around, once approved, this assessment that goes, using Brookfield as an example, Brookfield will receive 3 invoices prior to this period where they only had received 1. And they will each receive the same detail sheet as they have in the past. If approved, all of these assessments reflect the reduction in their previous assessments, obviously. We went from $1,151,000 to $921,207. The reduction is largely a result of the state share.
Right.
So, it's a good
So
thing.
there's been no feedback from the hydros?
We have not reached out to the hydros
Okay.
per se, and once we get into, 45 days and the board has
Okay.
approved this, then, and DEC has approved it, then sure, we'll see the feedback we get. But that's kind of in a nutshell. It's straightforward to the folks in-house, but having been close to it now for
Happy to
6
answer any
months.
questions you might have.
Just so I can sort it out. There's a small portion that went to the counties now, right?
Correct.
And because of the state share now, actually the hydros have been reduced a little bit.
All have, in effect, it has reduced the total to be assessed to both parties.
Yeah, right.
Obviously, the counties are a new party, but
And it was broken down by river because of the influence each river has on the hydros.
Right.
correct.
Right.
All right, thanks.
Basically, this employs a similar concept to that used to craft the March 2013 Hudson River area
Yeah.
apportionment. That had ultimately been determined to be a methodology that was rational by the Appellate Division 3rd Department. We're in the 4th Department now, but
They won't find it rational.
they won't find it irrational. We are not precluded in this case, unlike the Hudson, from including the hydroelectric generating facilities as beneficiaries. The apportionment will be used to reset the percentage of cost for the regulating district for fiscal 15, or fiscal 16-17,
Correct.
and will be used to establish the percentage for future years. It calculates a reasonable return to the state at $0. There are no direct state resources that have been employed to enable our current operations. We again, consistent with what we did previously, are grouping the towns, villages, cities to establish the county beneficiaries. We talked about that in a memo earlier. Consistent with the 3rd Department ruling, the statutory requirement to view does not require the entire board to visit each parcel or even municipality, but as Director Mullen has indicated, the board and staff have already done that. And through Appendix F that Rob put together, that's really the method through which you're viewing each of these parcels. If you are okay with that, staff is okay recommending that that is what you do. The process from this point forward, the board must certify the apportionment to DEC for its approval. And then, should the apportionment be modified after the board hears the grievances, it must recertify the apportionment to DEC for its approval. But in the short term, certify it for its approval. Once DEC approves it, then the board has to afford any interested person an opportunity to grieve the apportionment, which is a 45-day notice period before you'll hold a hearing. It's our estimation that we can get DEC approval and hold that hearing at the September 13th meeting in Loudville. As the board chair pointed out, it's in the Black River area. Couldn't have worked out better for us. And in the event that we don't get DEC approval quickly enough, the October meeting is also in the Black River area, so we can handle that. Basically, need the board to ask us to publish the notice of hearing once we get DEC approval. Ask staff to prepare a press release announcing the apportionment, and basically approve the resolution approving the.
Yeah, just to be clear, the 45 days starts not when we pass the approval, when we get the DEC approval?
The 45 days would start once
Notice is
board, once staff publishes notice of the hearing, which cannot take place until after DEC has approved the apportionment.
Okay.
Our next step is to take this to DEC.
Right, okay. We got to approve it and then take it to DEC, right?
Yep.
The resolution is on page 60 and 62.
Well, I have some glimpse of how much work went into this presentation, how much work went into and I compliment all the members of the staff for this was quite a project. Our thanks. I would like to have a motion to approve the Blackwater area apportionment.
I'll make-
Approve,
Go ahead. Go ahead,
River,
David.
Black River area.
That too. Go
I
ahead.
make the motion to approve.
I'll second that motion.
Mr. Bergstresser?
Any further discussion or questions that we have of the staff? If not, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, and thanks for the effort. Moving on to contracts. Finally, because I skipped the others. Not that that was important, but I skipped that. Resolution to authorize the seal coating at the Sacodaga Field Office. Mr. Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Seal, the blacktop at SFO, Mayfield office, has never been sealed since it was put in '93. So it's a desperate need. We're getting some cracks, and it needs attention this year. I wouldn't let it go any longer. We're going to look at a bigger expense and tearing up pieces, and the weather gets in there, so we thought it'd be a good time to seal coat the whole thing and be done with it.
Resolution's on page 63, by the way.
I can make that motion.
I'll second.
Authorizing.
Mr. Bergstresser, Mr. Neto.
Is there a price on that?
It's a 9,500. It is we have identified an MWBE firm.
Okay. We have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Resolution authorizing amendment of the USGS joint funding agreement. Mr. Folker.
Thank you. That can be found on page 64, board package. Electrical service at the Hadley gauge was probably installed in the 30s, I believe. At that point, the electrical utility company, who also owned a couple of the hydros, were our beneficiaries, gladly put in the electrical service for us. Last year, I believe it was, due to the need for some repairs, we realized that was unmetered service at that particular gauge. So we had to put a meter in, and that metered cost, typical of the other USGS gauges, where USGS handles and maintains the account for the electrical service or the telephone service, now it needs to become a part of the cost of our the services we are provided by USGS, and so the district staff recommends amending the USGS cooperative agreement, increasing the contract price by $2,071 to a total price of $328,541 for the 3-year period, and seeks board authorization for the executive director to amend the joint funding agreement to cover that cost.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Sure.
USGS, do they use those gauges also? Because we seem to be paying the lion's share of them.
We do, that's the cooperative agreement that we have has over the years, at least over the 17 years that I've seen it, the proportion has become larger.
And they use it also,
And-
right?
Well, they provide,
Or they just,
they provide the service, the public, and via the contribution that we make or other cooperative firms, entities make. It's,
You mean to
it
tell
certainly
me
is, I'm sorry.
the 85-year-old meter is not functioning anymore?
Well, there was no meter, that was the point.
we just plugged an extension cord into a box on the
They
pole.
gladly provided the electrical service to us, so. Yeah, it is charged responsibility under ECL that we maintain records and flow.
Right. Oh, I understand that.
So it's,
I was just wondering if anybody else was using that while we were paying for it.
well, certainly the general public
Yeah.
takes advantage of
Well-
our funding of the sites, for whatever reasons they might have to need to watch it, monitor it, but they're certainly critical and
Goes back to Mr. Smale, needing to talk to Mr. Fulton to get the data.
One way or the other.
I go on that website several times a week, okay? And as Rob knows, when I call up, I usually already know the answers. I'm confirming my interpretation of what's happening.
And
I
that's
think we're going to impose a user fee now.
Yeah.
GSLA will have fun that. So, also, I'd like to point out, our primary home is down in the Florida Keys, and I noticed that several of the gauges, GSLA gauges down in that area have been taken off the line. I assume it's government cutbacks and that they've just stopped servicing those. Now, most of those I assume is probably fishermen and stuff like that are looking at the flows of the different streams coming into the bay. I appreciate that you are funding these because it makes it useful for me to inform the public what's happening.
There's certainly a necessity, and I think it would probably cost us more in the long run to acquire the land, to put in the structures, to maintain it, to have the staff that needs to be in the field to maintain the, almost 24 sites that we have around the two watersheds, so.
Okay, so we need a resolution authorizing the amendment of the joint funding agreement, USGS.
I'll make that motion.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it. Mr. Rosenthal, Mr. Hayes.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution to authorize second amendment to the contract, C022014.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Bill, that-
Find my memorandum on page 66. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission requested a supplement to the third independent consultant safety inspection report at Conklinville Dam. They requested the independent consultant complete an evaluation and assessment of the Dow valve operation and maintenance adequacy. Mr. Wooten, Lee Wooten, our consultant who performed the third independent consultant safety inspection, provided a scope of work and fee proposal to meet this additional information request. That is attached to my memorandum. And GEI, his firm, proposes to complete the additional or supplement to the third independent consultant safety inspection report for a cost not to exceed $2,327. Staff recommends acceptance of GEI's proposal to complete the supplemental work for the third Part 12 safety inspection, Port Conklinville, and seeks board authorization for the executive director to amend the contract C02-2014 to include the additional scope of work and increase the contract price by $2,327.
Any discussion, any questions?
There's no problem with the dial valves, is there? Is it just normal?
No,
inspection
actually,
maintenance?
the FERC regulations require us, the independent consultant and the district, in terms of the data that we collect and provide to FERC, requires a summary of spillway gates. Specifically, the regulations define spillway gates and use the term spillway gates. We have, to this point, defined us as not having any spillway gates for obvious reasons. I mean, I think the intent of the regulation, the federal regulation was written, was literally for gates that are mounted on top of a spillway.
Okay.
That's typical of a lot of facilities that you'll find, larger facilities. Our dowel valves are completely different than that. And so we have just indicated that we have, to this point, not had spillway gates.
Right.
FERC has decided that regardless of how that might be interpreted, they need to have an evaluation of the dowel valves, which really is done as part of the general project, but they specifically want it addressed now in this particular section related to that particular regulation. So we are substituting in, so to speak, the dowel valves for the spillway gates. So much so that I actually presented to FERC a summary of the information we would provide, because what they asked for we could not answer,
Right.
because it doesn't apply to the valves. So it meets their needs, but it has nothing to do specifically with
Yeah, I understand.
the wording of their regulation.
It's already been done, but they don't understand it. so they
It
want us to do some
addresses that hole that
Explain.
they saw in the description of the project.
Got it. Thanks.
So I need a motion to authorize the amendment to contract C022014 in the amount of $2,327.
I'll make that motion. I'll second that.
Mr. Hayes, Mr. Rosenthal.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And lastly, on contracts, motion authorizing staff to engage in appraisal. Also, Mr. Fulton.
I have. Yeah, I
So
don't
it starts on
have
page 72. The chief engineer and I, we went up to Berea, to Hawkinsville, to the Black River Educational Organization Association.
Thanks.
And we met with their chairman of their board, and we were pleasantly surprised to find that they were willing to consider the land that's required for the Hawkinsville Dam remediation to actually sell it, vice provide an easement or a lease of that land. And to make their organization aware of the value of it, they wanted to have an appraisal done of the land itself, sort of thing. It was very straightforward, I think, as well as survey work. We already have a surveyor that's on call, so this would complete it and then be able to provide them the information that their leadership would need to further engage in the conversation over the possible sale of that land.
That's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, that memo is on page 72. So the staff is requesting board authorization to procure land surveying services
Very good.
through the existing contract with Ryan Bigg, Clark Davis Engineering, and also authorization to procure real properties appraisal services as necessary through its discretionary authority pursuant to State Finance Law 163, which authorizes purchases without a formal competitive process in certain circumstances, including purchases from New York State small businesses and from businesses certified pursuant to Article 15A of New York State law. So staff seeks board authorization for the executive director to execute an agreement with the real property appraiser firm in an amount not to exceed a value established by the board. So we'll leave that.
Can you give me an idea?
We would we just talked about it.
I have no sense for it.
I don't either. Not a clue.
I think for the most part, we will be coming back to the board in any event with
Okay.
the amount
Okay,
that's
okay.
Let's do it then.
provided in the proposal from the firm.
Okay.
So,
That sounds fair.
but.
Yeah, if you
but
could just say
I think
not to
it's
exceed
reasonable.
$2,000
We could-
for the purposes of this, that would more than cover it. We don't think it'll be that much.
Right, right. And then,
Okay.
We're trying to provide them that information before their September board meeting, in which their board chair travels in for, so that would be helpful.
I'll make a motion authorizing staff to seek an appraiser in an amount not to exceed $2,000.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
And
Staff and committee reports.
Same thing for the surveyor.
Jeff and myself.
That's for the appraiser. There's a,
Yeah, for the appraisal.
right, the surveyor's under a separate contract.
It's already under a separate contract.
Already.
That's under an existing contract.
so we don't need a motion for that.
Yeah.
No.
Right.
Staff committee reports. Governance committee, Mr. Rosenthal.
Mr. Chair, this would be the third reading and now moved for full board's consideration, the sexual harassment prevention policy. In a nutshell, it's been updated to conform with other changes made throughout the state.
Mr. Leslie, you have any further comment? I don't. So you're making a motion to revise the,
I am.
we have a second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Second issue.
Mr. Chair, this is also brought to the board based on Mr. Leslie's presentation in the Governance Committee. The DOT took title to some land to build the Bachelorville Bridge, and now they've built the bridge, and we want our land back. So this authorizes OGS to negotiate with DOT to get our land back.
I'll make that motion.
Second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? General counsel report, Mr. Leslie.
I can be brief. The Erie Boulevard filed its brief with the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. I am working with the Attorney General to prepare our brief. FERC's brief is due August 15th. Our brief will be due August 22nd. All of the executed stipulations of settlement and order have been received from all of the courts connected with the NIMO litigation. And the final thing is the Authority Budget Office confidential surveys are due September 30th, which I've given each one of you a copy of the policy document put out by the ABO. And in there it has, at the third page, a confidential evaluation of board performance. If you could make your check marks, put a date on it, and give it back to me. I will compile them for the Governance Committee Chair, or in the alternative, you can give them to the Governance Committee Chair.
Very good.
I got that one electronically on an email.
Yes, that's probably true.
Any questions? Thank you. Mr. Siki.
Thank you. My report can be found on page 74. The first quarter fiscal year 16-17 utilization report was submitted to ESD for approval. Since the numbers were run for the board report, we have had some changes. Our actual utilization for the quarter will be 35%, which still puts us above the required 30%. The Chamber and ESD are creating report cards to let us know how effective we are at the MWE program. They are to be released in June. We have not received ours yet. We did, however, receive approval for our fiscal year 15-16 master goal plan. That's last year's plan, so we're through that part of the budget. They have put a backlog, so don't anticipate receiving this year's until next year. As a reminder, on pages 75, 76, and 77, you will find the contract status reports. They're included in your board packet each month with the updates. Their inclusion satisfies your requirement to review them and meets the Public Authority Law Section 2879. Our first quarter SDVOB report is due July 31st. That will be submitted with a 0% goal. We had no purchases through veterans businesses this past quarter. I do anticipate some upcoming ones. I have identified 14 potential MWBEs and/or service-enabled veteran businesses that we hope to use for the appraisal for the Hawkinsville Dam. And we are engaging a SDVOB for the carpet replacement at Sacandaga. So we will have some utilization for our second quarter, hopefully. If you have any questions, if not, that completes my report.
Any questions?
So you think we'll get an A+?
I know.
All right.
Chief Fiscal Officer, Mr. Farrar.
Mr. Chairman, my report, my highlights can be found on page 78, detail reports 79 through 92. I'll be brief. We're basically in the pre-independent audit stage, performing preliminary work to get ready for the pending audit, which we still have scheduled for August. I have not gotten a specific date from the auditors yet, so hopefully we get that soon. An item from last month, the board approved commercial insurance premium for this current fiscal year. That was $194,437. That was adjusted down due to an item that was included that was a rental item. So the annual amount went to $193,823. Saved a few bucks. Under New York State Administration, the public authority reports, the big group of reports, procurement, investment, the independent audit is part of that annual report, and data requests are due June 30th. Historically, we've gotten that done on time. The only report we have not has been the independent audit, again, subject to what's involved in the audit. The Sacandaga Field Office permit system, the data conversion is basically done as far as we've been told, and basically we're looking to receive a beta version. They were going to offer us some of the screenshots, but we made offered up some recommendations as to some of the things that we thought should have been included, so probably going to receive that maybe this week, I'm not sure, but and then I'll report that to the board at the September meeting. I can't see this thing not being in place by the end of September, the latest, if not sooner. Page 93, there are board expenses that I have an update. We included the chair's expenses. So it's just Mr. Finkel's are included in this report.
Here.
So the report includes expenses for Mr. Rosenthal, Mr. Netto, and now Mr. Finkel, and I would request the board make a motion to approve those board expenses.
We have a motion to approve the expenses?
I'll make.
I'll make.
No, go ahead.
Mr. Hayes and
Somebody
I'll
make it.
second it.
Mr. Bergstrasser.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Chief Engineer, Mr. Fulton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The report begins on page 94. June precipitation, Hudson River area is below average, varied from 89% at Indian Lake down to low 61% of historic average at Conklinville through June 27th. And in the Black River area, did a little bit better in terms of precip. Stillwater had 127% of historic average, actually, and fairly close to 100% average throughout the Black River watershed in total. Great Sacandaga Lake is below the target elevation due to that lack of precipitation that we've been experiencing, although we are tracking very closely to the historic average. Indian Lake is about a foot, foot and a half below the historic and the target elevation. Stillwater's been tracking pretty closely to our historic average elevation, as well as Six Lake and Old Forge, with the exception of the brief periods of time when we get some heavy downpours and have to make some quick adjustments on our releases to accommodate those rapid inflows. We're tracking right along at those two reservoirs also, consistent with historic average, maintaining those elevations throughout the summer. I'd be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Any questions? Thank you.
All right, quick, was there some work scheduled for the Old Forge Dam this year?
None this year, no.
Hudson River and Black River Administrator, Mr. Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My report starts on page 128. We attended the Great Sacandaga Lake Association meeting here in Northville. Attended a pre-functional exercise for the Stillwater Dam Emergency Action Plan in Crogan. Mr. Smallin and I did a windshield tour, if you will, with some of the properties and beneficiaries from Lake Ontario to Crogan along the Black River. Attended the FERC inspection at the Conklinville Dam. Mr. Leslie and I attended a meeting with the APA regarding some of our rules and regulations. And I went up a couple weeks ago and assisted the staff at the Black River Field Office with a partial pour of the concrete floor for the new garage floor. And we're going to do another pour here probably in 2 weeks, but we got rained out on our second day, so that's my report in a nutshell. I'll be glad to answer any questions anybody may have.
Any questions, comments? Thank you very much. Any board member questions and comments? I need a resolution for our next regular board meeting, which is September 13th in Lowville. Resolution?
I'll make that motion.
Mr. Hayes?
Second?
I'll second.
Mr. Bergstrom?
Any further, all in favor?
Aye.
I'd like a motion to go into executive session.
So I'll make that motion.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we are in executive session. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Don't know.
Rosenthal, no.
No.
And what is that your time? We have 11, 12?
13.
13?
Yes. So that so you have that as a time going into executive session?
I've got 11, 13.
Okay, got it.